Today we're running this Citizen Science Nature Recovery Network webinar. Just a few points as you're joining us, and the session will be recorded today. So we presume as you are attending that you're happy for it to be recorded. There's a chat feature. I don't know if any of you have used Zoom before, so you can type in there and say hi to people, and we'll be using it as we kind of discuss our slides and stuff later on as we go through. And if you do want to put a note in the chat, please make sure if you want to have the message going out to everyone, you have to have selected at the top that it goes to all panelists and attendees as well. Yeah, so today basically, obviously quite a lot of people have probably seen these. Wildlife is kind of struggling at the moment, and we're going to be discussing today how collecting records and data where you live can kind of help support a wilder future for all. So my name's Lauren. I'm the press. I do press, social media, and marketing at the Trust. And then we've got Rory and Dave Cadman here as well. I don't know if you guys want to introduce yourself to just people that are starting to come on.
Sure, yeah. I'm David Cadman, Senior Conservation Manager at the Trust. So I do lots of stuff relating to what we're discussing today. So lots of nature recovery network stuff, a lot of surveys and land management advice with the landowners of Staffordshire.
I'm Rory Middleton. I'm the Senior Ecological Data Officer at Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, but I also work for Staffordshire Ecological Record, which is a part of Staffordshire Wildlife Trust. So we're the county's local ecological record centre, and we look after the county's sort of biological data. So we take that in, process it, and then provide that to people who need it. Also, same as Dave, I'm involved. We've got quite a lot with the Nature Recovery Network mapping side of things, and little bits of survey here and there when I can.
Brilliant. So we've got quite a lot of people attending today. So we've got 90. So we're just waiting for them all to come on, which is why we get you to come on a bit earlier so you can log in and sign up. So what kind of things are we going to be talking about in the presentation then today, Rory and Dave?
So in terms of what I'll largely be covering is about sort of the Nature Recovery Network, which is a relatively new sort of concept, although the ideas behind it are many years old, and looking at where do we need to do recovery of what sort, so dependent on the habitats and the species that are recorded to have appeared in particular areas. So what is the most appropriate sort of habitat type to encourage nature's recovery across Staffordshire?
Yeah, so I think what I'll be covering is sort of the run up to that, if you like. It's the sort of citizen science side of things and data collection. So obviously the Nature Recovery Network map relies upon a sort of firm, robust data set that is gathered via citizen science or via professional surveys. So what I'd like to cover really is sort of how people might be able to help in gathering data to sort of forward the thinking with the Nature Recovery Network mapping, and maybe cover a few other things that the data that we gather or that you guys gather can be used for by the Wildlife Trust and by local ecological record centres.
Right, so quite a juicy lot of topics today then that we're going to get through. Hello to all those that are starting to come on the webinar today. Just a reminder that the session today is Citizen Science Nature's Recovery, so we've got quite a lot to cover today. A reminder that there's a chat box feature on the webinar if any of you haven't used Zoom before or attended a Zoom webinar, so you can chat in there amongst yourselves. And just make sure that you've got selected all panelists and all attendees. If you want everyone to see your message, you can send private messages on there as well. A few bit of technical info. The session will be recorded today, so we believe that you're happy for that to happen if you're joining the session.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to say we are quite conscious that we can sort of slip into technical language. So please prompt us on the chat that if we say anything that is jargonish, please give us a nudge and we can explain what we're referring to.
Yes, you can ask any questions like about the presentation in the chat feature, but there's going to be a Q&A at the end, so you can ask our experts here, Rory and Dave, any questions at the end, and you do that by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be going through those questions at the end of the session. So yeah, hello to all those who are joining us. Again, this is a chat feature on here. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about kind of the data recording, ecological surveys, part of the trust, Rory. So how many kind of records do we get a day kind of coming into the trust?
So it's quite hard to break it down daily, really. So, I mean, a lot of the data is sort of delivered to us on a sort of monthly, quarterly, annually, sometimes it's even sort of 10-yearly, with some people dropping records into us. But we've got a database currently which is about 2.5 million records. They stretch all the way back to around the early 1900s, so sort of 1920-ish. That from the original sort of field club data. So that was when there were these quite large groups of people throughout the county that gathered together purely for the sake of recording data, really, out of a sort of mutual interest. Most of our records are bird records. Obviously, they're what people are most keen to identify. They're probably some of the easier things to identify, and they're most regularly seen. But we've got records of everything, really, all the way down to sort of bacteria on our database. So it covers a whole microcosm of species. It's not just the sort of big, showy species. It's all the way down to the sort of minute species that are really hard to record.
Right, hi to everyone who's just joining. You're joining us for our Citizen Science Nature's Recovery webinar today. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded, and if you have any questions, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we also have a chat feature on here as well, so you can kind of chat amongst yourselves, and also ask any questions maybe about the presentation that's coming up. And we're just waiting for a few more people to come online, and then we will start the presentation and the session off today. So maybe just to kind of get things going, shall we ask kind of a few questions? So you can kind of put your answers in the chat box there. So let's start off with quite a nice one. So what wildlife have you spotted locally that's kind of inspired you? Dave and Rory, I don't know if you want to start it off, and then hopefully other people will kind of get chatting in the comments as well. Mine has to be the curlew. I've learned quite a lot about that through a lot of the conservation work that we do, and was lucky to spot one on one of our reserves. So that's probably what my favourite was.
Do you want to go first, Rory?
Yeah, sure. So quite lucky in the fact that I live quite close to Cannock Chase, and we have quite a lot of deer that end up coming quite close to the house, sometimes into the garden. It's a really nice sight. Like last night, for example, we had a herd of deer, probably, I don't know, 30 or 40, roaming around in the fields behind our house. Can cause a few problems. They get into the garden and they've eaten a few tomato plants. But yeah, it's really nice just to be able to walk out in the evenings and go and see them. It's really feels like you're close to nature, close to the house when you've got stuff like that just on your doorstep. Makes you really appreciate where you live, I think.
Yeah, again, looking more locally of late, obviously during the lockdown and whatnot. So for my own particular interest, it's the small family of hedgehogs we've got in the back garden now that the two children are absolutely obsessed by, bringing out little bowls of cat food every evening. So yeah, something that's just literally on your doorstep, and the sort of discovering that has been particularly interesting of late.
Yeah, I was quite lucky. I had a hedgehog come into my garden last year, a resident one that kind of keeps visiting maybe once every 2 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
What are everyone else commenting? Someone's favourite house martins. They're quite a regular one, but that's a nice spot. Smooth newt, that's a really good one. Newts are quite rare, aren't they? I think. So if anyone has any records of those, yeah, it'd be good to get those sent in. We chat later on about how you can send in records to the trust as well. Hedgehog, Alana's got hedgehogs as well, that's nice.
urban foxes, that's always good.
Yeah. Sand martins. Okay.
Wow, on the banks of the River Tame. Nice.
Nice, that is, yeah, really good.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I wonder if they're nesting there. Could very well be.
And another one that might be quite a nice discussion before we start the session. What is your favourite place to spot wildlife and why? Mine, probably I live quite close to a National Trust site, which is the Barlaston Downs. So I quite like going there, a mixture of woodland, heathland up there. I heard curlew up there recently, which obviously are quite rare. So that was quite a nice spot for me to hear up there. So what about you, Dave and Maury? What are your favourite?
For me,
wildlife?
where I am locally, it's Jackson's Coppice, Jackson's Marsh. It's a nice site I go to quite a lot. More widely, the number one site is still Motty Meadows down near Wheaton Aston, which I've been going to for the best part of 20 years now, looking at the grassland there and particular species. So that's probably some of my favourites.
I'd say mine, certainly lucky enough to live local to Cannock Chase, so Cannock Chase has got to be up there for me in the sort of with the local sites. You can go out and see different things at any time of the year. There's a lot of different habitats on there. Good for a variety of different species, really. So going and seeing green hair streak sort of previous 2 months, it's always really good. I think wider in the county, it's probably a toss-up between two of our reserves, actually. Is Cottondale and Thorswood, both of which I'm quite fond of. The views from Thorswood are spectacular, certainly up around there, the Weaver Hills. Yeah, and obviously the variety of grassland species that are there is amazing. And Cottondale, it always feels like you're on your own there. It's quite a secluded spot. You can always find secluded spots in there. It's a really nice little valley woodland.
Yeah, if any of our attendees haven't visited any of our reserves yet, we've got 30, I think now. We've recently bought one kind of last year. You know, we've got a wide range of terrain and habitats and they're across the county, so they're certainly worth checking out. And if you go to our website, you know, you can look, read all about our reserves on there. So 4 minutes past 1, so we'll probably start the webinar now. So just a reminder that the session is getting recorded and you've been online. We're accepting the fact that you're probably happy for us to be recording it. There's a chat feature on here if you've not attended a webinar before on Zoom, so you can chat amongst yourselves on there as we're kind of going through the webinar. And we've also, if you want to ask any questions, we're doing a Q&A at the end of the session. And there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. You can ask your questions in there and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the session. So to start off the session, we're going to do a bit of a poll. So I'll get that launched up now. And some of them questions are multiple choice, some of them aren't. So I'll get launching up now. Okay, so you all should have a poll that's come up on your screen. So the question is, what information do we need from you when you send in a wildlife sighting? So a reminder that the webinar today is on citizen science and nature's recovery, and we're going to be learning about recording data and how that can aid in nature's recovery in Staffordshire as well. So got quite a few votes coming in. I'll still leave it a little bit longer. People are still deciding, not fully sure what to choose here. Just give a couple more seconds. Some of you really having difficulty deciding. That is a tough one, to be fair, if I was answering it. I've had a sneak peek of our presentation, so I can probably answer this one now. But okay, right, I can share the results now. So you should all able to see the results. So where was it 100%? When, who and what? Kind of mixed reviews on the air. I don't know if you want to comment on this, Rory, or do you want to go for it later?
I mean, it will be answered in the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a bit of a trick question.
Trick, right, okay.
Yeah. They're actually all necessary for a biological record.
Trick
so
question.
We'll cover that a bit later.
That's a bit mean for the first one. Right, let's launch the second question. So, have you ever sent in a wildlife sighting to your local trust or environmental record centre? And obviously today we're going to be talking about why records are important. So it'll be interesting to see how many have actually sent in records and are a bit of nature detectives out there. A few more votes coming in. It'd be interesting in the chat if you wanted to know about whether, you know, it was actually, you know, maybe Staffordshire Wildlife Trust that you've sent in records to as well. It'd be interesting to see how many of you have sent in records there. I think most of you have probably chosen your answer now. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. Oh, so quite a lot of you have sent in records. Few of you haven't, and obviously we'll be going today about why it is important. Hopefully we can convince quite a lot of you to start, you know, noticing kind of what you're spotting around you and recording what you're seeing and sharing the results.
Oh. Well, hopefully we can flip those figures around today,
yep.
or after today. Get those 60 into that 40.
Okay, and we've got one more question today. This is a multiple choice question as well. So which of the following are the wildlife records we get sent used for? So this is quite a hard one as well, but again, I've had a sneak peek of the presentation, so I can probably answer this one now. It's quite a few options there, having a good think, a lot of you, about what to choose. Give a couple more minutes for the results to come in. This is a tricky one. Right, let's have a look at the answers. Probably think I'm being a bit mean, but I think that's probably enough time. Ah.
Oh, interesting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of you feel strongly that we use it to monitor species populations and their life cycles, and to ensure planning applications don't negatively impact species and habitats. So that's quite interesting.
Well, they certainly are used for both of those, but again, it's another trick question, because actually we use it for all of the things that are in that list. I mean, some of them are newer than others, certainly. The sort of planning application side of things we've been doing for a while, but helping to map nature recovery is obviously a newer thing. And those that were in earlier in the chat might have picked up on that we started discussing how it's going to be impacted on that. But yeah, we use the data for all of those things, which I'm going to cover in the presentation.
Yeah, nature recovery networks kind of probably seems a bit of a buzzy technical word, but it's really not that complicated. It's quite simple. So, and Rory will kind of go through that later with everyone. So that's the end of the little poll that we're doing at the start. So it's quite interesting to see how many of you are sending in results and what you think they're used for. So I'm going to actually launch the presentation now. So I'll hand over to Rory and we're going to actually be doing a bit of an activity halfway through the presentation as well. And as I said, answering questions at the end. So if you did want to ask a question about sending in records or about wildlife in Staffordshire or how to record, then you can just use the function at the bottom of your screen there to submit a question as well. So, right, I shall share the presentation now. Okay, that should be launched now. Can everyone see that? Is that okay, Dave? And is that coming up okay?
You can see notes as well.
No, I'll stop sharing for a minute and try and launch again. It might be that we just have to have the notes on there. It's not playing ball today. Here we go. Ah, there we go. Okay, so over to you, Dave and Rory. I'll let you start the presentation.
There we go. Right, okay, so the presentation today is just going to be discussing a little bit about citizen science and who is a citizen scientist and sort of what the data that citizen scientists gather is used for. So I suppose the first port of call is really who is a citizen scientist, and that is essentially, it could be anyone. Anyone can become a citizen scientist. The idea behind citizen science is it gets the general public involved with gathering data for scientific projects, and it allows a lot of data to be collected in a relatively short space of time. I mean, citizen science as a phrase isn't specific to wildlife recording or biological recording, but that's kind of what the focus of this presentation is going to be on today. So you can become a citizen scientist in anything, really. Importantly, you don't need any previous experience to become a citizen scientist. There's no formal sign-up. You don't need to sign up to anything. Most of you probably already are citizen scientists. All you need really is a keen interest. There's no time restrictions. You can fit it around work, whatever, anything else. And it's really become quite popular recently with things like the Big Garden Bird Watch, the Big Butterfly Count. Those are all examples of how citizen science is used to gather really important data. So if we go to the next slide, please, Laura. So this is what we sort of covered earlier in those poll questions, that what is needed in terms of citizen science. So we're obviously asking people to become citizen scientists in lockdown, to record wildlife on the doorstep. So what we need first is to sort of determine what basic information is needed for a biological record to produce wildlife records. So first one is who, so that's who the person recording is, what you saw, but people often think that it has to be the actual sighting of a species, but that's not always the case. It could just be if you've heard a bird singing and you can identify it from its song, that's good enough for a record. Or it might be something like you found footprints. Again, if you can identify the species, then that's good enough for a record. It might even be something as simple as like animal poo. If you can identify what it's from, it could be a record. So we need when, so as accurately as possible, the day, the month you saw it, if it was a long time ago, and where you saw it. So as accurately as possible, something like an address, a postcode of reference is all acceptable for that. But those 4 pieces of information are really only the basic pieces of information you need. So if you've seen a species, for example, you might have seen multiple species, multiple individuals. So the number of individuals you saw, were they breeding? What was their behaviour? All these kind of extra bits of information really help us have more confidence in the record, if you like. And one thing to note is photographs almost always help. If you can't identify something, take a picture of it, try and identify it when you get back home. Failing that, if you can't identify it, there's always people that can help, either online. Beware of Google image searches. They're not always the best in terms of identifying things, but there's a lot of online resources there that can help identify things. So if we could just go on to the next slide.
And I guess as well, there's quite a lot of species that can look very similar when you talk about it. So.
Yeah. Especially the smaller you get with animals, the more and more difficult they are to identify. So there are a number of helpful apps and things like that would help. So iRecord is it's been around for a while. That's kind of a sort of standard in terms of what people use to record now. It's a national scheme. iNaturalist is a relatively new one, so that's another app that you can download, but that's got some quite good features where it'll allow experts to verify your records. These all get circulated into a national database. Seek is another good one. That helps you identify things, but again, it's an American app, so it might struggle a bit with some of the UK things. Another useful resource is the National Biodiversity Network. There's a lot of online digital maps on there that you can look at species distributions and things like that. And lastly, the Field Studies Council. So they produce a lot of really good guides, sort of laminated fold-out guides that you can take out into the field and use. They run some really good training courses. They've got a thing at the minute called BioLinks, which is a really sort of wallet-friendly courses, like a £5. You can spend a day, and they tackle some quite difficult to identify groups. And they're really in-depth surveys, really knowledgeable staff, and they do some really good stuff. And then, most importantly, make sure you send your records to your local environmental record centre. So
I'm just posting a link to our
yeah.
records team in the chat
So
now for people.
Staffordshire Ecological Record is the record centre for Staffordshire, so we're the repository for all the biological information in the county. If you're not in Staffordshire, you can visit the Association for Local Environmental Record Centres website, and they've got an interactive map of which record centre is in your area to submit sightings. So if you go to that, then you can find it. If you can just move on to the next slide.
I've posted a link to that other site as well if people want to use that one in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So crucially, you might be asking why you should be gathering the data. So that's kind of the most important thing. And the four things I've got listed as bullet points on this slide are really only sort of the tip of the iceberg. The data that gathered by citizen science is, well, it forms the backbone of basically all the nature conservation work that Staffordshire Wildlife Trust are doing. Without a sort of robust data set, which is gathered through citizen science, it becomes really difficult to make decisions that are based on sort of a sound understanding. So it helps us sort of plan our management of reserves, and certainly on like third-party wider countryside sites. It helps us monitor the spread of species and potential threats to species survival through things like pests and diseases, for example. And it helps the protection of habitats and species against damaging practices, either through planning applications or poor management. And obviously there at the end, we've got the particular focus at the minute is for this nature recovery network mapping, which we're looking to carry out. And it's how we can plot what the landscape might look like in the following years. Without any wildlife data, that would be essentially an impossible task, really.
So it's really key, isn't it, that we kind of get, especially at this time when nature's really at threat.
Without any data, it's really quite difficult to make the decisions. So these might be a little difficult to see, but there's a link that I think Lauren could be able to post into the chat. So these are just a couple of maps that I've lifted from a journal report. So the one on the left shows Grassopar nassus, which is a species of sort of unimproved meadows and marshes. And you can see that the map illustrates that the previous range for Grassopar nassus was much greater than it is currently. That's largely a result of sort of agricultural improvement and draining of wet sites and things like that. So without data, it becomes impossible to plot how the species has changed over time. This is where citizen science really comes in, is having that data makes it possible to be able to plot things like this. And then the map on the right is for a cricket called the Roselle's bush cricket. Previously, the range before 1990 was sort of restricted to the sort of southeast of the country, and then you can see in 1991 to 2000 it started spreading further north, and 2001 onwards it spread even further north, and it's now well established in Staffordshire. So a lot of these records will have been gathered through citizen science, and that just shows the importance, really, being able to track a species over the course of, 30, 40 years there.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's very well established now in the county. It's in a number of sites, and it's obviously progressing further north year on year. And that's all that what you can see on that map is all driven by data collected by you guys. So we're on to the activity. We picked a really good day for it, as it's.
I think where I am, it's cleared up the weather now, so hopefully it's like that for everyone.
So using the information I've just given you, I'd like you to go outside, sort of 8 to 10 minutes, or if you can't go outside, just do it from your window. If you don't want to go outside, just create one wildlife observation. I'm not suggesting you submit it today or anything like that, but if you could submit it, it'd be great. But just remember the 4 Ws and everything that I've been talking about in this presentation, and just go out and generate a wildlife record.
Yep, so we won't need to go out now, maybe for 5 minutes, and we can discuss people's results. And then in the chats, if you want to kind of share what you've seen afterwards, and we'll be here just waiting for you to come back. And for those that kind of can't get outside, as Roy said, you can kind of look out your window. And I did say on emails that we sent out that, you know, it would be useful to maybe have some binoculars or something as well. So yeah, maybe for those that can't go out or don't want to, I mean, we could have a bit of a chat more about kind of the records that we get sent in and stuff. So if we've got any like really rare sightings that we've been sent in.
I had some amazing footage sent to me yesterday that was of a stoat up a tree, and I've never ever seen, honestly, I've never seen footage quite like that. It was, I mean, they were within like a metre of it. I've never. It's just you don't see sightings of sort of stoats and weasels and things like that well. It's just, yeah, unbelievable little piece of video. But it's just somewhere in the Churnip Valley. Yeah, really, really good. The records of, certainly in lockdown conditions, the records of mustelids, sort of stoats, weasels, polecats, that kind of thing, we've certainly seen an increase of those. I think people are, because of the quiet sites, when people have been able to go out and have a walk, obviously there's less disturbance, and they're kind of in the middle of footpaths and things, and people have been able to see them. It's, yeah, really amazing.
Maybe would we be allowed to share the stoat video on social media? Probably is it a good one for us to share?
Yeah,
I feel like people will want to see it now that you've mentioned the stoat in the tree.
Just, yeah, I think it's more amazing the fact that the proximity they were to the animal. It was, yeah, unbelievable, really.
I was sent some photos this morning from Jonathan Groom, our monitoring officer, of some curlew chicks on a site in the Southwest Peak. So it's nice to see that a species that has suffered quite badly over the last sort of 50, 60 years, showing quite a stronghold around the Southwest Peak. And again, this is very much the time of year where chicks are about, so it's nice to see good numbers around sort of Knotbury and Gunmore and that sort of part of the Southwest Peak area.
For like the past, is it 2 or 3 years we've had a is it Working for Waders project up in the Southwest Peak, which is helping birds such as, you know, curlew.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's probably worth mentioning as well that we're trying to get hold of a site called Gunmore in the Moorlands, up near the Roaches. If everyone probably has heard of the Roaches in Staffordshire, it's a really gem of a site up near there, and we've actually launched a pill around it, and there's some really rare birds up there, such as the snipe, which looks quite similar to the filly, which isn't doing very well up there, and we want to kind of buy this site so we can conserve, you know, these rare kind of species that are on there that are struggling and in decline. And it's fabulous views from up the top of Gunmore as well, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah, see for miles, yeah. We'll try and share these photos on social media that Jonathan sent through. It's nice.
Another thing that I've seen recently is there's someone in Stone has seen green hair streak in their garden, and it's a green hair streak butterfly. It's quite a long way from any other known green hair streak sites, so it's sort of a bit of a mystery as to how it's gotten there, but it's nonetheless an amazing record.
That's a good spot, yeah. And if those of you stayed as well and haven't gone outside, just a reminder that you can submit questions to us as well that you want us to ask at the end, whether it's about a particular species in Staffordshire or something to do with our records team. There's a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen, and you can submit records in there. So has anyone been out and had a look to see if they can spot anything from the garden, or is rain kind of stopped playing today?
It's a shame it happened today, this webinar, really, isn't it? It's after all the nice weather we've had for the past month, and then the one day we do this, it's leathering it down outside. Yeah, it's still raining here. So.
Yeah, maybe give another minute for people to come in, and then we'll start the rest of the Oh, someone.
Large red dragonfly.
Yeah, that's still counts. I neglected to mention that even dead things still count as a record.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting.
We've had a lot of hedgehogs as flat as discus records in the past. Sadly, that's quite a lot of the records we get of hedgehogs now is when they've been squashed on the road, which is unfortunate. But
they've seen a massive decline, haven't they, hedgehogs across the UK?
Yeah, sadly. Oh, there's another one. Tawny owl. Yeah, that's a good record.
That's a really, yeah.
It's not cheating. Yeah,
I don't think it's cheating.
I think Kath's, who is one of the attendees, has raised a hand. I don't know if you've got a question, maybe worth just answering it in the Q&A section at the bottom, or if you use the chat, you can send us a private message as well if you want to ask anything. Yeah, it doesn't look like we've got any more. No. Okay, shall we carry on with the rest of the presentation? But hopefully, if people hadn't been able to do it with webinar, sparrows, so many sparrows people have got. Hopefully, if they haven't gone out today, you can use obviously a lot of the useful information that Rory's giving you, which one's by you to go out.
Yeah, I think it's probably important to stress really is that we don't want it to just be a one-off thing. We kind of want it to make its way into people's sort of way of life, if you like, rather than just doing it once and never doing it again. For people to sort of make a habit of submitting records regularly, because it encourages good behaviour. Then it might encourage others to start doing the same thing.
And it's a female spots, adult blue tit feeding 3 juveniles. That's a nice spot. Buff-tailed and white-tailed bumblebees.
Brilliant.
Alison has asked a question about bird records on a school walk every day. Same few, but is it worth sending them through? It absolutely is, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Send them through. Lauren's provided the link. We can provide it again later, but yeah, absolutely. Send those records in, please.
Yeah. And we do have a Q&A at the end of the session, so if anyone wants to ask any questions, we can go through those as well. But okay. Right, I'll leave you guys to go into the in-depth world of nature recovery networks.
Okay, apologies. Like I say, do pull me up if there's any too technical language. But so nature recovery network is a term that is widely in use now. Local authorities use it. A lot of the nature conservation organisations use it, and it's essentially looking at providing exactly what it says, a nature recovery network. So obviously we're looking specifically at Staffordshire here, but the ultimate is to have a nature recovery network, an NRN, for certainly the whole of England, if not the whole of the UK. So specifically in Staffordshire, we're quite sort of advanced in terms of our mapping progress. We're working with local authorities and other organisations in the county to produce this county-wide nature recovery network map. And our aim still is to complete the map with the local authorities and partners by the end of this year. And then there's a little document that you can see down there called the Wilder Britain, and it's a Wildlife Trust document that I very much do recommend people looking at. It's about bringing nature, close to the doorstep and having input into nature's recovery via the records that Rory's talking about submitting. So going forward, these nature recovery networks are going to be quite an important part of the forthcoming Environment Bill that's temporarily paused through Parliament while coronavirus is with us, but hopefully later on in the year this Act of Parliament will complete. Could I have the next slide, please, Lauren?
Yeah.
Thank you. So again, we're working with across the country, nationally, wildlife trusts are working with local record centres, and they're bringing in all manner of data sets to try and produce this map. So there we're talking about particular survey type. So these are 2 or 3 different habitat survey methods, but it's crucially the data from that we're bringing in to create this map. And as bullet point 3 talks about, it's also to coincide with the species and habitat data. It's also what is the land being used for. That's crucial in terms of how we plan what comes next for a site, or how we can link sites of nature conservation interest. But again, as that final bullet point sort of hammers home, all of this is absolutely dependent on local information, the information that we're talking about here that you've already started to sort of submit via the webinar. Our maps are only as good as the data that's in them, and having local data, consistent sort of data coming in, repeat data, sort of emphasizes what we need to do, where we need to do it. So that local data is absolutely crucial. Next slide, please. So in terms of Staffordshire, we've been using a methodology that originates from Warwickshire County Council, and it uses a particular piece of software to take all these data sets and look at sort of connectivity. So in nature conservation, we're very, very interested in linking and connecting sites. It's very easy, and I think that's one of the problems we've had over the last sort of 50, 60 years, is a lot of our most diverse sites are extremely isolated, and that makes their future extremely uncertain, because there's no way for those sites to become larger and to link to other sites. So that's why this is about a network of sites. So the map there you can see is an initial draft map of what a nature recovery network map could look like for Staffordshire. And those that are familiar with the county, it's quite clear. There are some very recognisable features and areas there. Obviously the blue of the watercourses, most noticeably coming out of the grey area at the top there, Stoke and urban Newcastle. Obviously the River Trent coming all the way out there, and over to the east, the west of the county, you've got the River Sow coming through the middle of Stafford, tributaries feeding into that. So that water corridor, and again, this is based on species and habitat information, it forms a map that is very recognisable for those that are aware of sort of Staffordshire. And you can see this sort of a faint yellow down in the sort of central middle area, the map, you can see that faint yellow that goes off towards Lichfield over into the east. So that's a heathland corridor that's very very ecologically significant area in Staffordshire. So that's stretching down from Cannock Chase through to Lichfield, and ultimately into sort of the West Midlands conurbation towards Sutton Park. So this map it's a combination of the data we've extracted from ongoing surveys, but the data that have come in, as I say, from local knowledge, from individuals, to some degree those ecological records that have been extracted from planning permissions, planning applications. So that's the map that we've got at the moment, and myself, Rory, and colleagues are working with local authorities to produce a very detailed map for our local authority areas. So as residents in Staffordshire, your local authority, hopefully by the end of this year, will not only have a map like this that has been partially sort of constructed from the data that you've submitted, but if they haven't got it, then they're on their way to having one. So could I have the next slide, please? So there we go. It's ultimately based on citizen science. This is the data that we've talked about. And as you can see there, so this map, there's a bottom piece there. I haven't got a pointer. Oh, there I have. So this piece here is the West Midlands conurbation. So nature knows no political or local authority boundaries. Nature moves where it needs to move. So obviously we are Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, so we are predominantly concerned about Staffordshire in the first instance. But beyond that, it's how, so these borders here, and obviously the counties that border us, we want nature to flow to and fro from Staffordshire in and vice versa. So he's put on a map there that shows the West Midlands conurbation and how that links to our mapping in Staffordshire. So obviously, somewhere like Kinver Edge down here, nature isn't just going to stop at the county boundary. It is going to find opportunities and networks to work into the West Midlands. So that's the sort of wider scale map that we're trying to aim towards, and working with colleagues to produce not only Staffordshire, but as I say, as you pull out a UK-wide map. So sorry, yeah, could I go on to the next slide, please? So the Q&As. But yeah, so I suppose in summary, although these sound like very technical terms, what we're actually trying to do is put wildlife in the right place. So of late, there's been a lot of call in terms of climate change for activities such as tree planting. And what we're, through this NRN, through the Nature Recovery Network mapping process, we're saying, yeah, absolutely, trees play a role in this, but we need to have the right trees in the right place. And this mapping process will enable us to sort of say, well, yes, this is, and it may often not be one particular habitat. It might be that we're looking at a range of habitats in a particular area, very much driven by this mapping that, again, is driven by those records we receive at the local record centre.
Yeah, that's been really interesting. I always see Nature Recovery Network as like a highway of like joined up kind of routes across the UK. And I guess as much as the trust is working to create these pockets of green spaces, we need people at home to obviously support wildlife in their garden and their outdoor spaces, don't we, as well? And a lot of our work, especially people engagement work, is geared towards people kind of connecting with wildlife in their area and supporting it as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the things so the lockdown has obviously constrained people's walks and activities. And what we've been particularly calling for is people to send in those records for those urban areas. Quite often, the urban areas are where we often have, bizarrely, the fewest number of records. And a lot of people they move out to places like the Roaches, the rural areas where we've got quite a lot of records. It's always good to have more, but particular focus around those urban areas. So Newcastle, Stafford, places like that. We'd really like to know what's happening in those urban areas as well. It gives us that additional level of information that we can incorporate into this mapping.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks, Dave and Rory. So as you've seen, we've now reached the Q&A section of our webinar. So what we'll do is we're actually going to try and bring some of you in live to ask your questions. We asked, I think Dave answered one here, but it might be good to recap it just in case other people haven't seen it. Kath has asked, or she said, I've got a very small pond and garden and would like to know which are the best plants for butterflies and bees. I don't know if you want to talk about what you answered there for that one.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, for other people that might be interested as well.
Yeah, so I in the chat, I just suggested what we want in the ponds is definitely a succession of sort of plants in flower. So I'd recommended things like purple loosestrife, that's quite a prolific flower, and flowers from sort of June pretty much through to the autumn. And again, it does very well. Ponds and the edges of ponds. The other one was flag iris, that again, be quite a nice one to add, because we're looking at not only the length of flower, the length of the flowering period, but also the sort of shape of the flower to give a better sort of option, a range for different species of butterfly and bee. And then another one was water forget-me-not, which again is particularly good for newts, but also has a different size and a different flowering time. So I think the combination of species like that should give us both a decent sort of period of flowering, but also different sort of niches and flower shapes for different invertebrates.
New toad numbers are commentators declining over the years. So what we did is each year we run a campaign called Wild About Gardens, and as part of that each year we choose a particular species that we want to focus on, and we provide a free booklet and guidance for people to download. And a couple of years, actually it was last year, we ran one all about ponds. So I've just pasted a link to that in the chat if anyone wants to have a look, and there's some nice activities for families that you can do as well. To create kind of a mini pond, then we're going to detail in that as well about how to create kind of a proper life-size pond as well, and what kind of species you can attach to it. That's quite an interesting read as well. So I'm going to try and bring Hannah Slim in now, who's got a question. Now, if you've got a microphone, you should be able to come in live and ask the question. If we have technical difficulties and you can't come in, I'll ask a question for you, Hannah. But I'm just going to try and bring you in now, so you should have a request come up. Is Hannah there? Hi, Hannah.
Hi, I think it's working. I'm not too sure.
I can hear you, that's working. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I was wondering if there's any challenges in terms of communication when navigating the political boundaries of the project.
Excellent question. Yes, in summary. Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we're doing is about that sort of advocacy. So the document I sort of referred to earlier was that's what we've used in talking to local authorities. So although there'll be legislation that follows the Environment Bill, we want people to be engaged in this. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that Rory and I do is sort of talking to local authorities, and we've had some really, really good local authorities and staffs that have signed up and ahead of the game compared to other areas. But as you say, that there are difficulties when we come to sort of neighbouring areas. Not everyone is at the same sort of stage. So beyond what we're doing in staffs, we need to join up with people in Derbyshire County Council, Shropshire County Council. So we've got that buy-up, and to be perfectly honest, that's what takes quite a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the key points that's in the Nature Recovery Network document that Lauren shared on the chat as well is the fact that these Nature Recovery Network maps are all developed locally but delivered nationally, and that is one of the biggest highlights of that document, really, is that there has to be a local input into the development of the maps, because that's where ultimately where the knowledge lies, is with local experts and everything else. But if they only work independently of one another, then nature recovery networks will cease to be a thing, really. They have to be able to work cross-boundary.
Yeah.
I hope that helps answer the question. Have you got anything else that you'd like to ask Hannah, or does that kind of answer everything, do you think?
I think that's answered it, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Hannah. Thanks, bye.
Bye.
So I've got a question from Alison here as well. So I'm going to try and bring you in just as I have Hannah, Alison. But again, if you don't have a microphone, I'll ask a question for you. So is that working? Is it, Alison?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Alison. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
My question was around HS2 and whether that has affected your nature recovery networks and the plans around those.
It's a bit of a difficult one, really. Certainly, it's something we've got to factor in. But I think as of yet, because I say there's no boots on the ground, that's not strictly true. It's the habitats, we've got to treat the habitats as they are currently. Obviously, HS2 has got a sort of plan in place for what it wants to see beyond the completion of HS2. But we can only really deal with what's known currently, and things are going to have to change. The Nature Recovery Network in itself is designed to be able to adapt to change in habitats and things like that. and obviously it will change as new data becomes available. But at present, we're just working off what we have on the ground currently in the county. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dave, or not.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Like you say, Rory. And we're hoping that what we're doing better guides mitigation for HS2. So obviously they have, as a massive infrastructure project, they have their own team of ecological surveyors that are generating these records. We can use our mapping to make sure the line delivers the best possible mitigation for these important ecological sites through the county.
I hope that helps. You asked another question as well, Alison. I know you kind of we answered it a little bit earlier on in the chat, but we have people kind of coming into the webinar all the time when they've obviously been able to make it. So I don't know if you want to re-ask your question and we can answer it for those that might have missed it who have just kind of joined the webinar as well.
My previous question was, my son and I, we try and spot all the different birds on the way to school every morning. Obviously not at the moment, but when we are on the school run, we tend to see a lot of the same things over and over, but it just helps his identification as well. And we were just wondering whether that's worth sending into our local wildlife trust.
Definitely. I think the key message from that, really, I think I tried to answer it in the chat as well, is the fact that we encourage people to send in records irrespective of how common or perceivably common they are. And particularly, like you say, if you're seeing things repeatedly, that data is invaluable, because that's really where you start to notice changes in population dynamics and things like that. Is if all of a sudden something's gone missing, then it becomes much more obvious if you've got like reams of data effectively to go back on to say, well, it's been here for this long and now it isn't. So even common things, really, or things that seem to be common, can undergo massive declines, and it's important to have that information to hand if that is ever the case.
And to illustrate Rory's point, a few years ago we were looking at Cannock Chase and various sort of species sightings from around Cannock Chase, and we found that we'd got almost no records for rabbit around Cannock Chase. Now clearly there are lots of rabbits on Cannock Chase, but we had no records, or very few records to say that. So these these common place species, it's still, as Rory said, it's very important that we have those records too.
Okay, I hope that's helped answer both of your questions, Alison. Is there anything else you want to ask, or is that everything?
No, thank you. That was great.
Okay, thanks, Alison.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending. We've had, just a reminder that you can add any questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We had a couple of questions come through on social media in advance of the question. So obviously if those people are, I can't necessarily bring them in because some of you have different usernames to what you've got on social media. So I'll ask those questions for you. So someone's actually asked, is there any wildlife that you would particularly like a sighting of?
What was that, sorry?
Are there any wildlife or species that you would particularly are after sightings of?
I mean, we're not focusing on one particular species or anything like that. Obviously, some standouts usually are things like hedgehogs, because they're anything that's undergone decline. So hedgehogs, toads, frogs, any of that kind of thing, really. Certainly, if you've got ponds, there's quite a lot of pond life, sort of emerging dragonflies and things like that. But we don't really focus on one particular species. Occasionally, we might run sort of an independent, I don't know, one-off focus on a species, but we aren't doing that currently.
I think I would just add to that, it's just not necessarily what, but where. So what's on your local patch, I think, is what we'd be particularly keen to find out. And I say, as I said earlier, sort of some of these urban areas where we often have the least amount of data. So what's in your immediate sort of patch, that's what we want to know about, really.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And we've had another question of Peter, and he says, how can people support wildlife other than just carrying out surveys at home?
So there's a number of things you can do at home. You can plant nectar-rich flowers for pollinators. You could get involved with work parties. I know we're not running them at the minute, but that's certainly one thing we could do on our nature reserves, is get involved with doing some work party work to improve practical habitat management. There's quite a lot of ways, really. If you're erecting bird boxes, things like that.
And I work in the comms team, and we run quite a few campaigns across the year as well, such as like 30 Days Wild, campaign for a wilder future, and all those. We've done one earlier in the year for HS2 as well. And if you take part in those as well, you can find out how you can support wildlife on your doorsteps as well.
Yeah. They're all valuable ways of supporting nature, really. It's just they're slightly different in how they're approached.
Mm-hmm. And the final question that we got sent in on social media is, can people still take part in surveys even if they're self-isolating from home at the moment?
Yeah, certainly. You can do it from Windows. You can just look out into the garden and see what you record. Like Dave was saying earlier, the emphasis really is on your local, sort of taking ownership of your local patch, really, and recording that way. So anything from sightings from a garden that you see out your window, that's perfectly fine, more than adequate. That's precisely what we're looking for.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, I did miss one off. Julie's asked if you're not sure about a particular species, like what it is can they still send it in? Like, what's the form like online via the website, or do they just is there an email address you'd rather ask them and send a picture of first, or how does it work in that instance if people aren't sure about what they spotted?
From my point of view, I'd like people to have a go at identifying stuff in the first instance. It's far better if we receive an email saying, I think this is X, and at least they've had a go at identifying it. There are a number of sort of resources online through the various different recording schemes that will provide some form of ID help, if you like, so sort of images or keys and things like that. We always prefer that people sort of have a go first at identifying something, but if they're really struggling, yes, we can identify things potentially. I mean, some things are too difficult to be identified from a photograph. Well, a lot of things can be identified from a photograph. So.
Yeah, I would say, to back that up, that photos are invaluable, really. So, by all means, have a go at identification. But if you've got a photo, we can help. There's a network. I don't claim to know anything, no, very much, but we've got a network of people we can distribute photos to get us some help on identification.
Yeah. Okay, and Hannah's asked a question. I'll bring her in quickly because we only have till 2 o'clock. So I'll try and bring Hannah in to ask her question. And I think we've finished the questions then, and we'll just do a bit of a summary then. So, hi Hannah, can you talk? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I was wondering whether you would favour less but more accurate data by like one demographic, or would you favour more data over a larger age range, but as a consequence the data is less accurate?
I mean, that's
quite a good question.
That's quite an important question, really. So from my perspective, having to process the data, I think you can probably guess which one I would favour. I would always be in favour of more accurate data, I think. Because if you can't associate a confidence value to what it is that's being recorded, then sometimes the data isn't actually usable. So like we were talking about before, if you've not got the 4 basic pieces of information, the 4 Ws, it makes the data tricky to use. Whereas if you've got something that's very accurate, sort of, I don't know, it's got a 10-figure difference, and they've provided a photograph, and they've got a breeding status on it and things like that, it makes the data far easier to use, and it's also sort of having that degree of accuracy gives you that confidence in the record. Whereas if you've got a lot of data which doesn't necessarily have much information behind it, it makes the data more difficult to use and ultimately might end up steering us down the wrong path when we come to use the data for something, if you like. Yeah, that's the way that I would view it. But obviously, a lot of data is also good for certain things. If you want quite coarse data, then national data sets, for example, might value that more than a few precise records.
Okay, I hope that answered your question and helped, Hannah.
It did, thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, sadly, we've come to the end of our webinar. Just going to do a bit summary on how you can carry on kind of getting involved with the trust for the last couple of minutes that we've got left. So I don't know if any of you have heard, maybe you have, and that's how you sign up to the webinar, but our wild webinars are part of our Get Wild from Home series. Oh, it started from the beginning now. I'll quickly go through. Yes, you can sign up online to be part of our Get Wild at Home series, and you gain access. You can sign up for free and gain access to a load of resources from workshop videos all the way through to kind of booklets and stuff that you can download there. So that's definitely worth checking out. So what have we got coming up next? We're trying to continue to run a series of webinars. Our next one is on wildflowers and how they support nature and the species that kind of interact with them, and that's on the 18th of June, and that's a family friendly session as well. Another link, there's a reminder for the link to submit records to Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, and you've learnt lots of skills today about recording data, and quite a good opportunity, although we want you to do that all the time. Upcoming, we've got an event called the Big Weekend Wildlife Watch, which takes place on the 20th and the 21st of June. And if you sign up online, there's a link there, and you get a booklet of 30 key species that we want you to look out for in Staffordshire, although we encourage you in the booklet to send in, of course, any others as well. And it's quite good. You get facts on the species as well, and tips of what you need to look out for to spot them as well, and how to send those in as well. So that's quite a good chance for an opportunity for you to learn the skills that you've gained today. And of course, June is 30 Days Wild, so it's our month-long nature challenge where we encourage you to do one wild activity each day in June, and you can still sign up for that now, even though obviously the campaign started on Monday. So that's it really. We'd just like to say thank you to all our members and supporters who make being able to run these webinars and all our people engagement and conservation work possible, and being your local wildlife charity, we wouldn't be able to do any of this without you. So anything you'd like to say, Rory and Dave? That's kind of it for me, and thanks to all those who attended today.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and please continue to send records in.
Yeah, hopefully it's been informative for you all. Yeah, and like Dave says, keep recording and make it a part of everyday life.
Okay, well, I hope we'll see some of you on the 18th of June for our next session, or we'll come into contact with you at some way for our campaigns, and hopefully with you sending records into the trust as well. So thanks very much again for attending, and